Hello, wildlings. I'm your Creepsmith, and you found my Fear Forge. Lucky you. Well, wildlings, we find ourselves ready to find out the underpinnings of the weirdness, whys, and wherefores behind what's turned out to be one jacked up job. So, finally, we can put an end to querulous questioning in the fourth and final chapter of I'm a Cinema Usher. We Have Some Strange Rules by DrunkenSwordsman. My name is Sean. I've been a cinema usher for about 3 years now. My cinema has rules that you should never, ever break. Not if you want to live. If you're confused, you should probably listen to the last 3 chapters. Walking into work yesterday was probably the hardest thing I've ever done. Anticipation and fear mixed within me in equal measure. David's recommendation to rest and sleep had proven to be impossible to obey, and I'd spent the whole night dreading what would come in the morning. When I came to work, I found the cinema empty. A sign at the entrance announced, "Closed temporarily due to equipment malfunction." David was already here. He sat in his unlit office, staring at the wall, in silence. I walked in and stood at the door. I didn't have the courage to interrupt his thoughts. But eventually, he looked up. "Sean," he said, his voice hollow. "I'm sorry, my mind was somewhere else." He got up and walked over to me. "You said we were going to break the rules today," I said. "Yes. Rule 10 and 11. Rule number 10. If you find a book bound in black leather on the premises, do not open it. Rule 10, the black book, as we like to call it. You'd see it at pretty much every shift, and overcoming the need to open it was one of the first things that you learned to do on this job. No one has any idea what's inside its yellow, ancient pages. It moved and shifted mysteriously. You'd see it in the corner of the garbage room, propped up invitingly in the corner. You'd walk over to a room or to the office, only to see it first on the ground in the lobby and then in the office itself, lying on David's table as if it had always been there. We'd never seen even David open it. It seemed that I was going to see that now. It took us an unusually long time to find the book today. Searching first in the office and the lobby and the individual theaters, we then returned in defeat only to find it sitting on one of David's filing cabinets. He snorted derisively and went to pick it up. Its ancient-looking pages, yellowed by time, crackled as he opened it cautiously. From where I was standing, I couldn't see the words within, and I moved to look at them over his shoulder. And he slammed the covers closed. "Not yet, Sean. Soon." My temper flared. "David, I don't know anything about what's going on here. I don't know what we're here to do today or why we're breaking 2 of our rules. I don't expect you to tell me everything, but please, you have to tell me something." My anger receded as quickly as it had risen. I realized this was, despite everything, my employer. David smiled wryly, and there was a second silence. "You're right, Sean. You deserve to know something. I'm sorry. After 15 years in this job, you begin to get used to not telling anyone any more than they absolutely need to know. 13 years ago, I made a mistake, Sean. Room 3 tricked me by using my affection for someone close to me. I opened the room and I almost brought disaster on us all. It's ironic. Only the sacrifice of the person I thought I was saving helped to delay disaster." Delay? Yeah, Sean. We borrowed some time. Yesterday, Well, that time ran out. Unless we act, room 3 won't even need anyone to open it anymore. It'll escape by itself, and I can't allow that. And the book? What is it? I guess you could call it a manual of sorts. The rules of this cinema are all in here. He looked down onto the pages again. I could tell this impromptu informational talk was over. I could be happy for even the little that I'd gotten. David turned some pages, scanning their contents before pointing at a piece of the page and smiling to himself. Sean, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the room for a little while, just for a while. This shouldn't take long. I hesitated, but obeyed. Standing in front of the room, I could see David's shadow on the drawn blinds of his office window as he moved around. Suddenly, another shadow sprang from behind him. It walked around until they stood face to face. Then another joined it. Then another. Muted voices reached me. David's sounded resolute and determined. The answering voices, many talking over each other at one time, were sharp but barely heard whispers, like the drawing of a knife across skin. The shadows gathered around David. He stood unmoving, his hands falling to his sides, and the shadows leaped. They slid, merging in with David's, and disappeared. Not waiting for a command, I ran into the office. I crashed through the door, and David stood at his table, leaning on it tiredly and gasping for air. But he was unharmed. "What the hell just happened?" I asked. "What the hell were those things?" David chuckled to himself. "I guess you could call them messengers. Or taskmasters. Could you please not talk in riddles just for once, Dave?" I said, exasperated that even now I was being kept on a need-to-know basis. I called out to something that shouldn't be called, Sean. But this is a trying day, and desperate times call for desperate measures. Let's go. It should be arriving soon enough, and I'd hate to keep it waiting. He walked past me, still carrying the black book. After a second, I followed in mute frustration. Opening the door to the office, I saw what he'd been talking about. Rule number 11. The lady in black. Rule number 11. If a woman in a black dress offers you a drink, do not accept. A woman stood before us. She was tall, taller than either of us, and her pale face contrasted with her deep dark hair. She wore a flowing midnight black dress. In her hands, there was a carved wooden goblet. I had encountered the lady in black before. She, or it, walked around the cinema often, stopping ushers every now and then to offer them a drink from her goblet. The liquid within was translucent and looked, for all purposes, like clear water. Somehow, I always doubted that it was anything that harmless. Thankfully, she never forces a drink on us, making her one of the least dangerous things that you could encounter here. When you refused, she would nod silently, understandingly, and then move on. Now, she was here. "Will you accept my chalice?" she said, almost whispering. Her voice was faint and unfathomably sad. I made to refuse. It was almost muscle memory at that point, honed by dozens of encounters with her, but my words stuck in my throat when I realized that she wasn't looking at me. She was talking to David. He was quiet for a second. "I will," he answered finally. "David, what are you—" I began in confusion and panic. He cut me off. "This has to be done, Sean. There's no other way that we can stop what's coming." He turned back to the lady in black. "It's been so long." She smiled faintly and passed him the cup. "Drink." David took the chalice, He hesitated for a moment, wavering. His face hardened suddenly, and he drank the cup in one quick draught. Then he gasped, stumbled, and dropped it to the ground with a thud. He leaned on me heavily, and I almost fell over under his sudden weight. His face was a sickly pale. He coughed, and specks of red fell to the floor. "You have paid the price," the lady whispered. "I have," David replied, shaking with more bloody coughs. "Now, for your side of the bargain." "Indeed. What is it you seek?" She smiled sadly. I seek a way to halt Room 3 from breaking free." David was choosing his words carefully. He only had one shot at this, I realized. The lady frowned. "You will not like the answer, child," she whispered. "Are you sure this is what you wish to know?" "I am sure, damn you," David whispered through clenched teeth. A thin red trail ran down from the corner of his mouth. "Tell me." The lady leaned forward and whispered into his ear, words that I hope I never have to hear. Then she straightened her back again. "This bargain is complete. Farewell, David." She turned and walked away from us as if nothing had happened. She rounded a corner, and somehow I knew that she'd not be there even if I looked. David turned to me. Blood was now dripping from the corner of his eyes, too. The black book fell from his fingers. "David, what did you do? What's happening?" I stammered. "What did she tell you?" I had to lean forward to hear his reply, his voice weakening with every word. Go to the projection booth, Sean. Turn on all the projectors. Do it now, quick." The command in his tone was absolute. I ran for the projection booth. I swiftly flipped every switch, moving from projector to projector. The whir of machinery filled the air. Empty though it was, there was now a show in every room of the cinema. I realized what David was doing. Too late, I realized it. I sprinted back to the lobby, taking the stairs from the booth 3 at a time. I had to be in time. I had to. He wasn't in front of the office anymore. The black book lay open from where it had fallen to the ground, the only indicator that he'd ever even stood there. I ran over to it and looked around the lobby. Of course. David stood before room 3. His hand was on the handle. He looked back at me, blood in his eyes. "Don't!" I screamed. 13 years, Sean. Use them well. He called out to me. He smiled. Then he opened the door. The darkness on the other side was absolute, all light stopping the second it hit the doorframe. David didn't even hesitate. He stepped forward and closed the door behind him. I stood frozen. He was gone. There was a rumble, and the earth shook. The door to room 3 rattled in its frame as whatever was inside strained at the walls, eager to escape, but it struggled in vain. Whatever David had done, whatever his sacrifice had achieved, it had robbed room 3, bound it again, bought more time. The rumbling subsided. The door stopped shaking. There was silence. A rustle of pages below drew my gaze. I looked down at the book at my feet. It was open to the last page. There was only one sentence written in black ink. Rule number 12. There must always be a manager. Ouch! I mean, I've always heard about disproportionate responsibility in management positions, but holy hell. Still, there's something to be said for the continued existence of one's community. Anyway, stay scary, my wildlings. always realize there's a price to be paid. And make the most of your nights.